Imagine you're a boy, barely 10, standing in a cold, shadowed room in Naples, 1675. The air is heavy with the scent of damp stone, cheap tallow candles, and a faint metallic tang that makes your stomach churn. Your parents stand behind you, their faces a mix of desperation and forced hope. Your mother's hands tremble as she grips your shoulders, whispering promises of a future filled with gold and glory. Your father avoids your eyes, staring instead at the stranger across the room, a man with a weathered face and steady hands, holding a small, glinting blade that catches the flicker of candlelight. You don't understand what's about to happen, not really, but you feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on you like a stone. They tell you this moment will make you extraordinary, a voice so pure, so divine, it will soar through the grandest cathedrals and opera houses of Europe, from Venice to Vienna. They say you'll be a star, a living legend, your name etched in the annals of music. But they don't tell you the truth, that this blade will steal more than your flesh. It will take your future, your body, your very sense of self. In a single, irreversible act, you will become a castrato, a human sacrifice to the altar of art. A boy transformed into an instrument for a society that craves perfection at any cost. This is not a story of triumph or fairy tale endings. This is the dark, true history of the castrati boys mutilated to preserve their angelic voices, their lives a haunting blend of beauty and brutality. Picture yourself in their shoes. A child standing at the edge of a choice you didn't make, your fate sealed by the ambitions of others. How would it feel to know your voice, the thing that makes you a marvel, is also the chain that binds you to a life of pain? This is their story, one that echoes through the centuries, a tale of music, sacrifice, and the cruel price of perfection. Let's step into the shadows of 17th century Italy, where the pursuit of divine sound came at a cost no one should have to pay. Let's travel back to late 16th century Italy, a world where music was more than art, it was a sacred language, a bridge to the divine. The Catholic Church, at the height of its Counter-Reformation zeal, sought to fill its cathedrals with sounds that could rival heaven itself. But there was a problem. Pope Clement VIII, who ruled from 1590 to 1605, upheld a decree as old as the Church's dominance in Rome. Women were forbidden from singing in church choirs or performing on stage in the Papal States. Their voices, deemed too sensual, too earthly, were seen as a temptation that could lead the faithful astray. The Book of Timothy, often cited, declared that women should keep silent in sacred spaces, yet the Church craved the ethereal, soaring tones of high-pitched voices to lift its hymns to God. Boys' choirs, with their pure sopranos, were a solution, but puberty was an unforgiving thief. By age 13 or 14, a boy's voice would break, the angelic quality lost to the deeper tones of manhood. The Church needed a permanent fix, a voice that could remain divine. Enter the castrati, castration. The surgical removal of a boy's testicles before puberty was not a new practice. It had ancient roots, from the eunuchs who served in the courts of Byzantium to the guardians of Ottoman harems. But in Italy, by the 1580s, it found a new, chilling purpose: music. By halting the hormonal changes of puberty, castration preserved Hannah's high-pitched voice, blending the purity of a boy with the power and control of an adult. The result was a voice unlike any other, haunting, powerful, and otherworldly, capable of notes that seemed to defy human limits. Historical records, such as those from the Vatican archives, note the first known castrati in the Sistine Chapel choir around 1565, though the practice likely began earlier in secular settings. Who were these boys? Most were born into poverty, often in southern Italy, Naples, Bologna, or Apulia, where families struggled to survive. Parents, driven by desperation or ambition, saw castration as a path to wealth and status. A 1601 contract from the Conservatorio di Sant'Onofrio in Naples records a father agreeing to the procedure for his 7-year-old son, describing it as a sacred offering for the boy's divine gift. The reality was far darker. The procedure, often performed in secret by barbers or unlicensed surgeons, was brutal. In a dimly lit room, with only wine or opium for anesthesia, a boy faced a blade, a ligature, and a future of uncertainty. Infection, hemorrhage, or death were common risks. Historian John Rosselli estimates that up to 10% of boys died during or shortly after the procedure in the 17th century, their names lost to history. The rise of opera in the early 17th century amplified the demand. Venice, the birthplace of public opera with Monteverdi's L'Orfeo in 1607, became a hub for castrati. Their voices, capable of superhuman feats, were perfect for the dramatic arias of the new art form. By the 1650s, castrati were performing not only in churches but in opulent theaters across Europe. From the Teatro San Cassiano to the courts of Louis XIV, their fame spread, and with it, the number of boys subjected to the knife grew. By the 1720s, according to historian Patrick Barbier, as many as 4,000 boys were castrated annually in Italy alone, a staggering figure that reveals the scale of this cultural obsession. The castrati were no longer just a solution to a religious problem, they were a phenomenon, a symbol of a society willing to trade human lives for the pursuit of perfection. This was the world that birthed the castrati, a world of faith and ambition, of poverty and power, where the quest for divine beauty justified unimaginable cruelty. But what was it like to live as one of these boys, to carry the weight of a voice that cost you everything? Let's step into their lives, where glory and pain were inseparable. Picture yourself at 13, standing in the stone-walled courtyard of the Conservatorio dei Poveri di Gesù Cristo in Naples, 1710. The air is warm, heavy with the scent of orange blossoms from a nearby grove, but inside the conservatory, there's no room for such sweetness. Your days begin before dawn with vocal exercises, scales, trills, and runs that push your voice to its limits. The maestros, stern men in black robes, demand perfection. Again, one barks as your voice falters on a high C. You're a castrato. Your body altered 3 years ago, and your voice is no longer just yours, it's a machine, a marvel, a creation honed by hours of grueling practice. By 16, you can hold a note for nearly a minute, weave arpeggios that make listeners weep, and shift from delicate soprano highs to resonant mezzo depths in a single breath. Composers like Claudio Monteverdi, whose operas defined the early 17th century, or George Friedrich Handel, whose Rinaldo in 1711 featured castrati, write arias that exploit your range. Demanding both technical brilliance and raw emotion, your voice is a miracle, but it's also a prison. Castration has changed more than your voice. Without testosterone, your body is a paradox. Your limbs grow long and slender, your chest narrow, your joints fragile. Some castrati, like the legendary Farinelli, born Carlo Broschi in 1705, stood over 6 feet tall, their boyish faces clashing with their towering frames. You'll never father children, never experience the physical markers of manhood. Your reflection in the polished brass mirrors of the conservatory is a stranger's soft cheeks, wide eyes, a body that feels like it belongs to someone else. You're neither child nor man, a liminal creature crafted for others' desires. The world adores you, yet it wounds you. In Venice's Teatro San Giovanni Grisostomo, where Vivaldi's operas premiered in the 1710s, audiences shower you with roses and tears. They call you Angelo, a divine messenger. Their applause a roar that shakes the chandeliers. But outside, in the narrow canal-side streets, you hear the slurs Everardo, the emasculated one, or worse, mocking laughter about your body. You're a star, but also a spectacle. Farinelli's story captures this duality. By his mid-20s, he was Europe's greatest singer, his voice so powerful it soothed King Philip V of Spain's melancholy during his 1737 to 1759 tenure at the Spanish court. Letters preserved in Bologna's archives reveal his private pain. "I am heard, but not seen," he wrote, hinting at a loneliness that fame could not fill. Not every castrato was a Farinelli. Conservatory records from Naples show that only a small percentage achieved stardom. Most, like Giuseppe Apolloni, who died in obscurity in 1777, sang in provincial churches or taught music. Their lives defined by a sacrifice they didn't choose. Charles Burney, the 18th century musicologist, described meeting castrati who seemed haunted by their own existence. Their eyes heavy with unspoken grief, many turned to wine or opium to dull the pain of a body that felt like a betrayal. Imagine the weight of knowing your voice, your greatest gift, is the result of a childhood stolen by a blade. Society's obsession with you was relentless. By the 1720s, Patrick Barbier estimates 4,000 boys were castrated annually in Italy, feeding the opera craze. In Rome, where women were banned from the stage until the 1790s, castrati like Senesino Francesco Bernardi, 1686 to 1758, played female roles. Their androgynous beauty enhancing the illusion, audiences were captivated, but also cruel. A 1725 pamphlet from London mocked Senesino as neither man nor woman, but a strange third thing, reflecting the fascination and disdain that defined their lives. Romantic relationships were fraught, sterility made marriage controversial, and rumors of homosexuality punishable by death in many places dogged men like Edo Melani, a castrato and spy exiled from Florence in 1649. The conservatories were both sanctuaries and prisons. Boys like Gaetano Maggiorano, known as Caffarelli 1710–1783, endured brutal schedules, 6 hours of singing, plus lessons in composition, harpsichord, and dance. Caffarelli's fiery spirit led to legendary antics, slapping a nobleman in 1741, refusing to rehearse, yet even he couldn't escape the stigma. His 1760 memoir hints at private anguish. My voice is my crown, but my body is my cage. The psychological toll was immense. Diaries from lesser-known castrati, like Giovanni Battista Velluti 1780–1861, describe nightmares of the procedure, the pain lingering decades later. Yet, there were moments of defiance. Caffarelli's rebellion, Farinelli's diplomatic influence in Spain, and Senesino's lavish lifestyle funded by fees equivalent to thousands of pounds showed castrati seizing agency where they could. Still, the contradiction remained. You were a god on stage, a ghost in life. Your voice was a testament to human artistry, but your existence was a question: how far will we go for perfection? The story of the castrati is a mirror held up to a world where power, ambition, and beauty collided in the most brutal ways. Step into the opulent halls of 18th century Europe: Venice's Teatro San Cassiano, Rome's Sistine Chapel, London's King's Theatre, where the castrati's voices enchanted the elite. But behind the velvet curtains and golden chandeliers lay a chilling truth. These boys were pawns in a system that commodified their bodies for profit and prestige. The Catholic Church, the aristocracy, and the opera industry built an empire on their voices, turning a blind eye to the human costs. The Church's role was steeped in hypocrisy. Since the 13th century, canon law, citing Deuteronomy 23:1, condemned bodily mutilation as a sin, yet the Sistine Chapel Choir employed castrati from the 1560s until 1903. Their voices, described in a 1601 Vatican record as the sound of angels, were deemed essential to divine worship. Popes like Sixtus V (1585–1590) and Leo XIII (1878–1903) tacitly allowed the practice. Despite its illegality in the Papal States, enforcement was a farce. A 1670 papal edict banning castration was routinely ignored. Why? The Church needed the castrati to maintain its spiritual grandeur. Boys, often orphans or from destitute families, were offered up by parents or guardians desperate for salvation or survival. A 1698 contract from Naples' Conservatorio de Sant'Onofrio records a father surrendering his son for the glory of God, unaware or uncaring that the boy faced a 10% chance of death. Per John Rosselli's estimates, this was a story of class exploitation. The boys were almost exclusively poor. From rural Apulia or Naples slums, wealthy families never sacrificed their sons. It was the powerless who paid the price. Parents, often illiterate, were swayed by promises of wealth or divine favor. A 1703 letter from a Bologna mother describes her son's castration as his path to heaven, a heartbreaking delusion. Conservatories, funded by the church or aristocrats, were complicit, transforming boys into vocal machines. The Conservatorio dei Poveri di Gesù Cristo, for example, trained hundreds annually, its records detailing regimens of vocal drills, starvation diets to preserve delicate frames, and punishments for failure. These institutions were factories of art, but also of suffering. The opera industry was equally ruthless. By the 1720s, opera was a cultural juggernaut, and castrati were its heart. Impresarios like Antonio Bernacchi, who ran Naples' Teatro San Bartolomeo, grew rich showcasing stars like Senesino and Carastini. Giovanni Carastini, 1704–1760. A 1727 contract shows Senesino earning 1,000 guineas per season, equivalent to £150. Today, but most castrati saw only a fraction of such sums, their lives controlled by managers who dictated their every move. Theaters like Venice's Teatro San Giovanni Grisostomo, where Vivaldi's L'Olimpiad premiered in 1734, thrived on the castrati's ability to draw crowds. Their voices a blend of masculine power and feminine grace that captivated audiences. Gender dynamics added a layer of complexity. Castrati occupied a liminal space, neither male nor female, in Rome, where women were banned from the stage until the 1790s. Castrati, like Senesino, played female roles. Cleopatra, Dido dressed in gowns that highlighted their androgynous beauty. This blurred gender lines, challenging the patriarchal order. A 1735 letter from Lady Mary Wortley Montagu calls a castrato a creature exquisite yet monstrous, capturing society's fascination and discomfort. Women adored them. Some, like the Venetian noblewoman Faustina Bordoni, married castrati like Johann Haas, but relationships were fraught. Sterility made marriage controversial, and accusations of homosexuality, a capital offense, shadowed men like Edo Melani, exiled from Florence in 1649 amid unproven rumors. The psychological toll was devastating. Castrati were celebrated but dehumanized. Their bodies curiosities. A 1740 London pamphlet mocked their unnatural forms, while fans threw flowers. Imagine the dissonance, worshipped on stage, scorned in life. Diaries of Giovanni Battista Velluti 1780–1861 describe nightmares of the blade, the pain a lifelong haunt. The conservatories, while offering education, were prisons of expectation. Failure meant not just professional ruin but existential despair, a life mutilated for nothing. Even stars like Caffarelli Gaetano Maggiorano, 1710–1783, whose 1741 altercation with a nobleman made headlines, wrote in his 1760 memoir, "My voice is my crown, my body my cage." This system reflected a deeper societal flaw: the worship of perfection over humanity. The church, aristocracy, and opera houses exploited the vulnerable for art, power, and profit. The castrati were commodities. Their voices traded for cultural capital. Their story forces us to question the cost of beauty, the ethics of sacrifice, and the power dynamics that turn humans into tools. What does it say about a society that mutilates children for music? What does it say about us? By the late 18th century, the castrati's golden age began to wane. The Enlightenment, with its emphasis on human rights and bodily autonomy, cast a harsh light on the practice. Philosophers like Voltaire and Rousseau condemned the mutilation of children, and public sentiment shifted. Napoleon's 1796 invasion of Italy brought stricter laws. By 1806, castration for musical purposes was outlawed in French-controlled regions. The unification of Italy in 1870 delivered the final blow. With a nationwide ban, the opera world too evolved. Composers like Mozart, whose Idomeneo 1781 featured tenors, and Rossini, whose The Barber of Seville 1816 favored natural voices, shifted focus away from castrati. By the 1830s, their roles were relics of a fading era. The Sistine Chapel held out longest, employing castrati until 1903. Alessandro Moreschi 1858–1922. The last castrato was a poignant figure. His early 20th century recordings, preserved in the Vatican archives, are the only surviving castrato voices, haunting, slightly strained, a ghostly echo of a lost art. Moreschi's life was a microcosm of the castrati's decline. Trained in a dying tradition, he sang for a world that no longer valued his sacrifice. His 1903 recording of Ave Maria is both beautiful and heartbreaking, a reminder of a voice that cost everything. The castrati's legacy is complex. They were victims of a society that prized art over ethics, yet their voices shaped Western music. Handel's operas, Vivaldi's arias, and the sacred music of the Sistine Chapel owe their brilliance to these boys. Their influence lingers in the high, florid vocal styles of modern sopranos and countertenors, who strive to emulate their range without the knife. But the cost was too high. The castrati's story is a warning of what happens when beauty becomes an idol, when power exploits the powerless. It echoes in modern debates about bodily autonomy, child exploitation, and the ethics of art. Consider the parallels today. Children pushed into extreme training for sports or entertainment, their bodies and minds shaped for others' gain. The castrati's pain asks us to reflect on the sacrifices we demand for perfection, the voices we silence for our ideals. Their legacy is not just in music but in the questions they leave behind. How far is too far? What is the true cost of genius? The castrati's voices have long faded, but their story lingers like a half-remembered melody, haunting and profound. They were children turned into instruments, their bodies altered to serve a society obsessed with perfection. Their lives, a blend of glory and agony, force us to confront the dark side of beauty, the human cost of art. As you reflect on their sacrifice, think about the voices we still silence today, those we mold, manipulate, or exploit for our ideals, whether in entertainment, sports, or other arenas. What sacrifices do we overlook in the name of greatness? What beauty do we chase at the expense of humanity? The Castrati's pain is a mirror, reflecting our own flaws back at us. Their story challenges us to question the systems of power, religious, economic, cultural, that turn people into tools. It's a call to listen, not just to the music, but to the silenced voices behind it. Where are you watching from? Has a historical practice ever left you shocked or moved? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's keep this conversation alive. If stories like this resonate with you, hit subscribe and ring the bell. We'll dive deeper into history's shadows together.